everybody, welcome to the Fuwanovel Podcast. OriginalRen here from the forums. We are now on episode 11, finally getting into the double digits. We've released 10 episodes so far, in addition to the Community Spotlight video series and the Community Spotlight video series, which I'm doing. I just said the same thing, sorry. The Community Spotlight video series and the Get to Know Your Community podcast series, which is about individual members from the community. So I'm currently working on interviewing some of the groups for the original VNs. We have 3 right now, which is the Lucid 9 project, the Violet Hill, and then there was the Pure Ribbon Studios. I forgot the name of their game right now. It's in Japanese, but they're all making original games, and in the next couple weeks, hopefully the next month, I should have podcasts for them up, just kind of to give you a preview of the project. I know they're working really hard on getting their demos out for one of the groups at least, and really working hard on their project, so obviously time frames are a little crunched and trying to figure that out. But here we have an original topic. We're just going to go on. I got this idea from playing a visual novel recently, a more recent one from 2014, and that's the Koiga Koro Sakura Doki game. And I decided, hey, I'm going to make a podcast out of this. So today I have with me 3 very special guests from the actual community, and I have Clestae, Danpc, and DavidA. 2 of these people are from the original VN projects that are being made, and Clestae is a newer member to the community and volunteered so kindly for the podcast. And so I'm going to have them introduce themselves here just like I normally do, and they're going to kind of give me a little spiel about themselves and why they wanted to be part of this podcast. So Clestae, I'll start with you. Please introduce yourself to the community and tell us a little about yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Clestae here. I've always enjoyed visual novels and just having lengthy stories in general in games. I'm mostly familiar with more of the newer visual novels that add some gameplay, so things like Zero Escape and Phoenix Wright. However, I also enjoy some like older point-and-click adventures from Western kind of games, and how those kind of relate also with visual novels and storytelling and such. Does that answer your question, OriginalRen?
Seems pretty good to me. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Dan, tell us a little about yourself and go ahead and introduce. Why do you want to be here today?
I just read the topic on Fuwanovel and I thought it was an interesting topic. So, yeah.
Good enough. Good enough answer for me. And our last guy here, David. What's your real name, David?
Yep, it's David.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, tell us about yourself, David. Why do you want to be here today?
Okay, so I really love visual novels. It's pretty obvious, I guess. And what got me started reading visual novels was probably anime, and that's probably the case for most people. And I saw the topic and about the podcast, and I'm like, sure, I've never participated in something like this before, and I thought it'd be a new experience.
All right, well, all 3 of you, again, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to jump right in here, and I'm going to introduce the topic. So for those of you who are unaware of what this topic is about, we're discussing visual novel interface and modern changes over the year, and how modernity in visual novels, when they were back in 2000 as compared to now, or even earlier than that, although I haven't really played too many VNs earlier than that, how they've changed over time. And we're not necessarily talking about the story or the character elements, but we might go into that. This is more focused on just how the actual visual novel as a whole has changed into the art styles, perhaps just the animation work that's done on it, how the detail, I'm not too familiar with too many visual novel engines, but just kind of what's changed over like playing a game like Clestae, who are most of you familiar with, as to like a more recent visual novel that's been released as of late. So with that said, I'm going to jump right into a question here and kind of open up to you guys. So our first question of this topic is, visual novels have gone through many modern changes over the years, and one of these modern changes in more recent games is the use of live animations during CG sequences and H scenes. In your own opinion, do you think the switch into the anime style for telling a written story is a good idea? Why or why not? Do you feel you are reading a story or watching a show with these changes? How does this affect your overall experience in visual novels? And so on and so forth. So I'll open this up to Clestae right away. Guess we'll start with the basic question there. In your own opinion, do you think the switching into the anime style, or just the animated CG sequences and things like that, for a written story, is a good idea? Do you feel you're watching an anime, or do you feel you're watching a show, or playing a game?
Right. Personally, I think part of the issue for me, I unfortunately have not had too much experience with seeing a more animated style, but my worry actually is not even necessarily with reading a story versus watching a show, but unfortunately, just in general with video games, when you have a game where they put more of their energy and assets into something like, art or animation, unfortunately something has to get cut. And what I worry about is that cut will be story, will be text, because you can't really have a visual novel without an expansive story. So for me, the issue is more of, are we cutting, out as much story as there would be if we had just, left it without the animated scenes. I feel like it can work, but I think it just realistically I feel like you are compromising just some of the story in that case.
Interesting point you bring up, because this has always been an issue, I think, for a lot of video games, the graphics versus story. And, like if you put more art effort and it's like, oh, these graphics are amazing, but this game kind of sucks. Have you played a lot? I'll ask you that. Have you played a lot of those like games growing up? I mean, did you own a bunch of consoles, or were you more of a PC person, or are you a big video gamer, I guess?
Yeah, I grew up mostly with the PS2. But I've also had experience on PC, Xbox, and later PlayStations. And I've seen, there's actually a game that comes to mind was on the DS. It's also kind of considered a visual novel, Time Hollow. Interesting concept, but they spent so much time making their assets beautiful. I mean, they had a full animated opening and music and such like that, but the story was pretty lacking. And so that's kind of my example, I would say, for a visual novel. But even in video games, you kind of see this trend going nowadays where you've got, they have more beautiful graphics, but the story, all of a sudden, you're playing the game and you think, wait, what is at the end? I'm trying to think of an example I may have seen. I tend not to play those games too much because I usually am more of a story-driven kind of person, but I know some examples people have said are like Heavenly Sword, if anyone ever plays that. That one's the biggest accusation, is better graphics, lacking, very short.
I felt that way about Final Fantasy 13, but I guess that's just my opinion. Sorry.
No, I think other people did too. I think other people did too. That's another example. Final Fantasy in general, a lot of people I think are accusing it of going more towards, aesthetics as opposed to the story that they, were well known for.
Okay, so I mean, do you like that? I guess I should ask, do you like what they're doing with that and they're adding more time into the element, or are you a big story person? Do you like, because it is a visual novel that we're talking about in this case, and visual novels, the first thing that comes to your mind is visual. It's the aesthetic pleasingness, but if the story, like, do you play games, I mean, that's going to be a dumb question, is do you play games for their story? Well, yeah, you'd hope you'd read the story, but, I mean, does that bother you that they're doing that, or does it doesn't affect you in any way?
As far as the compromise in the story, it does bother me quite a bit. I am a very big story person. I've always been more into writing and reading and such as a child. And there is something to be said for having good aesthetics. I think art is a very important part of visual novels, but you need to reach that balance, because otherwise it's more of a picture book than, a visual novel. You know what I mean?
That makes sense, yeah. So, I mean, if you can give an example of one visual novel that you like that has a more modern feel to it, and a visual novel maybe that you know from your past that you played, or even a video game that has like an older feel to it, but it's still a great game. And yeah, you can use an old console or an old like system or an old visual novel if you want. If you can't think of anything right away, don't worry, I'll come back. If you come up with something. So.
Okay, we have to think about this one. It's an interesting question.
Okay, I'll leave that one to you. Dan, I'll jump to you here real quick. What do you think about it? Just CG. Just the animation style of it. Like, I don't know if you play a lot of Nukiges. I don't play Nukiges really, but I know that when a Nukige, which is mainly focusing on the sex aspect of it, is very like, they're adding a bunch of animation because why wouldn't you want to watch actual porn? So like instead of just looking at still pictures. But what's your just opinion about any game in general and just what we've been talking about?
I think at least in visual novels, in the case of visual novels, adding a complete animated sequence can enhance some scenes, like if it's kind of a more dramatic scene or more action-packed. In those cases, it seems like it can enhance the scene, but if it's overused, it kind of ruins the flow of the story, I think.
I mean, when you play a game, let's use a game as an example, just to kind of pull this off. Have any of you guys played the Metal Gear Solid series, or at least any of those games?
I know about them.
Okay. Well, no. What I was going to say is Metal Gear Solid 4 was a huge game when it came to like you
It had
barely play.
huge cutscenes.
Yeah, you barely play any of the game. You play like for like 10 minutes and then there's another cutscene. And I'm just like using that as an example. Do you like watching a movie or do you want to read a story? Like when you play a visual novel, and that's kind of my point here. Obviously, the whole game is not going to be sequenced in animation, but I mean, do you like watching a bunch of openings and a bunch of like cool animation effects? Like, do you want to have visual novels feel more like you're watching an anime, or do you want to actually say, no, I'm reading these. I don't want anything to do with anime. I guess that's my question. So, if any, yeah.
Yeah, in visual novels, I prefer to read them than watching an animation.
Okay, fair enough. Um, is there any games that like I'll say the same question that I said Clestae here. Is there any games that you specifically know or visual novels you know that you really like and it has like maybe really crappy artwork or it's just really old in style? Like you can't skip like it just when you use the skip button it skips all the text. There's no like stop skipping when like as more modern VNs do. There's no like backlog, so if you miss a line you can't jump back. You can backlog it to read it, but you can't like go back to that scene to see what happened. You actually have to just read the text and then base it off of that. Is there any games you can think of that that have that, or like you like in the old time as compared to a new game you like now, or anything like that? And again, you can take your time to think about this answer as well.
I actually played two or three visual novels that are considered very old. And interesting enough, those older visual novels actually tend to have more gameplay aspects. I mean, the newer ones that are coming out now, like Zero Escape, Phoenix Wright, and such, seem to be going on that path again. But the older ones seem to initially have some gameplay aspects where you were able to interact with the environment and just select the places you wanted to go and such.
Okay, fair enough. David, you've been kind of silent the whole time. What do you think? You got any opinions?
It really depends. If it's like if there's a certain balance, then it's fine because you can't have too much animation for unnecessary scenes. You may want. How do I put this? It's like action-packed, like Dan pointed out earlier. Action-packed. It helps enhance the scene because when you read it, sure, some people might just want to read it and imagine it in their heads, but others just want to look at it and it on screen, and that kind of enhances the effects that this is pretty action packed, and I guess the big companies want to put animations a lot in their visual novels is because they want to attract a lot of viewers to their VNs because not many people like reading, unfortunately. They'd rather watch TV. So that's what I think.
It's interesting you point that out because I'd like to bring up something like I've gone on, I think it's what website is this, Getsu. I forgot the name of the website that does like visual novel ratings. It's in Japanese, but a buddy of mine has shown me that. Actually, Mephisto from the forums, if you're familiar with him. And a lot of the really like high-end visual novels are actually the ones that are really rich in story and are like extremely complex, and they get like the best ratings and they have the most like plays and are like the most sold actually. And it's interesting you say that because like, yeah, of course there's the games that people just buy, like New Kiges are on that list too. Like there's just games that people buy because they just want to buy them, but a lot of the times, like the really high-end ones, not the Moeges, for those of you who know a Moege, they're like the really good stories, the deep, rich stories that are like really complex. Like it's a medieval fantasy setting and it's like really complex vocabulary, and you might not understand it if you don't know a lot of Japanese, things like that. And it's extremely difficult to translate. I know like one of the games, Hello Lady, is a game that came recently. You probably may not know it, or you may know it. And that was a really good story VN, and that was actually one of the most top-rated VNs of the year. In fact, I think it was like 2014 so far, like top rated visual novel in terms of like rating and sales or something. So it's interesting you bring up that point about like how people they want to attract these people to the games with all their art style and like moe and cuteness, but it's like a lot of times the people really do like reading those deep stories. Um, so I don't know. That was just something that was curious to me, I guess.
Mhm. For me, I really love reading the story. I mean, if sure it could have really good art, but what really makes it is the elaborate, rich story that you want to read. I mean, visual novel. I'm sure it's visual, but the novel is also an aspect that you have to consider when you make one.
That's true. Okay, so I think it kind of this might be a good transition to the next question here. We'll jump right in. So now I was opening this to Clestae and Dan, and I guess I'll just say this to you too, David. List some examples of older visual novels you have played, or it doesn't need to necessarily be even a visual novel. It can be a video game if you want to use a video game as an example because it's a little more easier to like compare to visual novels. Describe how they compare to newer releases in terms of modernity. So like when you used to play games back in 2000, if you used to play games back then, playing games now. Do you feel these games have kept their charm throughout the years, or do you feel they're slightly outdated? Like if you go back and play an old game, when you're like, man, this was really difficult as a kid or something, and then you're like, now, this is really easy as a kid, or maybe it's like, wow, this is still just as hard. This game's impossible. Do you think it's necessary, more so, I guess, a good idea to update these games? Like a lot of times people are like, let's re-release it in high depth. And, they'll like re-release it and then people will be like, the remake was terrible. It was bad or something like that. Like, do you think that, I think they recently remade like Air in HD or Clannad or something. I don't remember exactly. Feel free to correct me on that. But do you think that's a good idea or do you think it should just be like, why, we don't need to do this. It's a good enough game.
I think my example, I'll try to incorporate one that I've played through, and one I'm in the middle of Fate Stay Night currently. But so I'll do the Fate Stay Night example, then I'll do more of a personal other video game example. With Fate Stay Night, I've found with it, I think actually the weirdest part to me from going from a newer visual novel to kind of an older one is actually the idea that I don't know who's speaking unless I can have the audio on, for example, because they don't label who's speaking what line.
That's very interesting.
And that's and that can work. I think that's just a simple fix. That's not really it doesn't necessarily to me necessarily make it that it's super part of its charm. I think it's just back then they expected everyone to listen to the audio, but of course nowadays either we either have our headphones in, listen to something else, or in this case, we're listening to the Japanese file, so it's not even in English. I mean, of course, you can have it up if you wish with the sound, but that kind of thing, it's not really a huge issue, but just something I noticed about it. However, in a bit more of a personal example, I actually tried playing. I'm not sure if anyone knows the Ico, with Shadow of the Colossus, but I actually tried playing Ico. A little bit later in life, not necessarily when it first came out, and I kind of had to laugh because it's still, even in the newer released version, to people who don't know, Ico is basically just a simple adventure game, not a lot of text at all. The whole story element is supposed to be expressed just in the actions you take and the small cutscenes and just kind of simple expressions. And part of the hilariousness of that game, though, is it still had a lot of PlayStation 2 issues where camera angles were not very well established. And it kind of made me laugh because that, I think, is just something that we kind of take for granted if anyone plays any major games nowadays. It's hard to say whether I would want that changed or not because it is that's kind of the whole point of it being an older game with that case. But, I mean, they didn't change it when they re-released it. But that one's a little bit harder to say because obviously it makes it harder for gameplay, but at the same time it's kind of an artifact in that way.
I like that you bring some of this up because this made me think of some things which I'll kind of come back into. I'm sorry about the dog. We will
No problem.
I'll come back into that, but kind of like going off what you were saying, you were originally talking about like going back and playing an older game. Like I've noticed that as well, and I'm curious, Dan, David, what do you think of this too? When I go back and play a game, an older, like you said, like there's little small things that happen. that change. Obviously the options change or little audio things, and it really bothers you by playing those old games. And in your example, Shadow Colossus, or that kind of game, it's like look at like Dark Souls now, which is more modern. That there is no text; it's all told based on you do the exploration, you get the lore. That's how you get the lore of the game. There's no written out story for you or cutscenes. I mean, obviously visual novels are going to tell you the story straight out for everything that's happening, but just things like that. Dan, David, what do you think? I'm curious. Any one of you?
Souls is kind of unique, though. I don't think there's a lot of video games that are the same as Dark Souls in the way they tell the story.
Can't really think of anything either, but I know like the new Destiny release, people are there's like no lore in that either.
Destiny is kind of
Yeah, I heard Destiny's not doing so great, but Bungie admitted their mistakes apparently, so we won't get off topic with that.
Visual novels.
Yeah, visual novels. So, okay. Anything else you want to add, David? Do you have anything to add or more on that, Dan?
I guess it's what makes an old game an old game. It has all those mistakes that the developers probably put in there. I mean, it's part of the game. I don't really see why they would remix it or make it an HD. I don't know. It just seems unnecessary to me.
So you like kind of the old games, because I've noticed that they re-release, successful games. What do you guys think of? I guess I should ask this as a side question. What do you guys think of just when Little Busters, for example, you have Little Busters, then you have Little Busters Ecstasy. We need to release age scenes because that was extremely important. Yeah, they had additional routes, but it's do we need the sexual content? And then they're like, hey, here's the Little Busters Memorial, Perfect Edition. It has everything, but now we've just not included the age scenes, but it just has all the routes. Well, why didn't you do that in the first place? Do you feel like companies have a right to do this, to just keep re-releasing their game as now it's bundled with this, now it's got additional scenes, but it's only 3,000 lines, it's not really that much, or something like that. Do you like that? Are you gonna buy the game all over again to play it, or do you feel that these should maybe be in patch form, the game itself should have a patch on their website or something, that kind of thing?
Well, they just want more money.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you as consumers, or you as purchasers of these games,
I don't think anyone wants to pay more for a little more content. But yeah,
I think having it in a patch form is a lot easier.
Yeah, but still, people will still buy them. For example, the Final Fantasy re-releases.
Oh yes.
There's
marketing.
10 releases of Final Fantasy 1, I think, and they always keep selling for some reason.
Do you feel when VNs do that they're trying to they're running out of ideas is why they're doing it, or do you think they're just doing it to get the more money? Because a lot of times I've noticed companies when it's we really don't have any games, let's just re-release. Let's make another Mario game, like Nintendo, for example. Mario's always a failsafe. It'll always be successful. But that doesn't make every Mario game they make absolutely the most incredible thing ever, but it still gets amazing scores because it's Mario. That's just how it works. But I mean, do you feel that, they're doing that because they're running out of ideas and they don't have any ideas, or they're just they want more money?
I think it's the safe route. I mean, Nintendo's an excellent example of that. It keeps people will keep buying, the new Super Smash Brothers, for example. Well, I guess that's not really a good example because they actually do try to do new stuff. But Mario, for example, or Legend of Zelda, they know people will buy it, and it's safe property. It's safe intelligence property. And so they'll keep kind of beating the dead horse because trying to do a new idea, that's the problem with new ideas, is that sometimes they don't go well. Sometimes they make classics like Mario, but at this point it's safer, and they know it's a guaranteed cash grab if they keep with kind of the same formula and set over and over again.
And I just want to expand on this. It's mostly a marketing scheme in my eyes, and I mean they can develop a story. It's just too much work would probably be spent on creating a new story rather than going with a story that, yeah, it worked before. Why not do it again? So.
Interesting you also say that because...
actually, I have...
Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
I have some... in some cases, some visual novels that are a bit older, they are not available to be bought anymore. So one of the reasons they release it is so that newer audiences are able to get them. I'm not saying that every company does that, but some actually do that.
And that's an interesting point. I'm actually going to ask another question here based on that. Do you feel in like as modern, as we go on to the future, like consoles are very set. Obviously, a new console comes out, and older games are going to be replaced. You're not going to find a Super Nintendo game or a Nintendo game laying around anymore. They don't make them, so you're not going to find them. But visual novels are all PC in this case. Let's just use, obviously Vita and handheld consoles, but let's just say they're just PC. Like, do you think that like these games should be stopped? Like, eventually you go, hey, you know what? This game's way too old. It's out of its works. We're not gonna, like obviously they probably stopped printing it. They're not going to make it anymore. But I mean, do you think that's like, just for cost and stuff? But do you think that's like, they should just stop selling it overall, and just pull it from shelves and be like, hey, you know what? This is such an old game, so we're going to ignore it.
I think that would anger some people, to be honest. Especially if it's kind of been the system they've been doing it. I don't know. I feel like you're just going to get a lot of. Some people are going to be kind of upset about it. There's something to be said about forcing companies to try to come up with newer ideas and stuff like that. But I have no idea how the public would react. Is my issue.
Okay. Anyone else? Like, do you like Dan or David? Do you think that's like, as a personal, person who likes to buy the visual novels or play the visual novels? Do you like, obviously, let's say we'll even use this. If you don't even buy your visual novels, and I don't like promoting obviously the torrenting or stuff, but if you do torrent your visual novels, like when they get rid of those, are you going to be like, hey, this game's way too old. No one's going to see this crap anymore. No one's going to be able to get this game anymore. Like, do you like that or no? I mean, is that going to upset you as a person, or is it, that's my question, I guess.
Oh, I apologize. I misunderstood your question, but let the others go.
Yeah, you will always want to play that old visual novel that you, at least your favorite visual novels, you will always want to replay them in an interval of a few years, maybe, or something like that. I mean, it's always nice to be able to revisit them whenever you want, and if you just deny that, I don't know, it feels like I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with this.
It feels like they ripped your heart out. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, you're getting taken away from a classic. My favorite game of all time is Donkey Kong Country 2. Sorry, this is my favorite game of all time. And if I ever lost that game, I would probably cry myself to sleep because I love it to death. I love Super Nintendo. But yeah, sorry, I know the question was confusing, but it was more just like, do you think that? I mean, they're all on the PC, so it's not like they're going to be like, hey, guess what? This PC's outdated. Like, you can always upgrade a PC. Like, it's still a disc, and like until like something changes where like compact discs or digital stuff, and it's very easy to convert. It's very easy. Like Japan can do this, and it's interesting too because like they can put Clannad as a digital like download. It's not that hard to do. I mean, it is all text file anyways. They just need to format it, and then hey, you can purchase the game. So that's one benefit, that you don't actually need the physical copy, and it's already on all like scripted and developed on the PC, so you can obviously just upgrade it, and do that. So, but I mean, yeah, my question was more so, do you like it when they take away this stuff? Because obviously there's old VNs that I probably won't be able to find anymore, or any way to get them. And I know that when I was in Japan in 2013, I'm going again here recently, they don't, like I'm not going to find Grisaya anymore, and that's a really popular VN. Like, I won't find the old collector's edition boxes that I found a year ago for $40, which is amazing, by the way. But I'm not going to find it anymore in stores. Like somebody said who went recently, they're like, yeah, they're not in the softmap stores anymore. And I'm like, what? Why would you get? It's an amazing VN. Like, why would you get rid of that? And so it upsets me. I just was curious on your guys' opinion too.
Yeah, as long as it's still available as long as it's available on the internet, on the PC, and it has fans, there will always be some way to play it. So
you're about to say something, Clestae, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I think there's something to be said about if they're able to keep them available. I mean, I think logistically wise, I'm not sure if they're able to, but there's something to be said about, the classics. It's like, I mean, when you think of books, they reprint books all the time, the classics and such like that. And so, we're reading, our children will still be reading, the old classics that we read as classics, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's still important to be able to do, even for visual novels, if it's able to be done. I think there's something to be said about that.
Okay. Very interesting. Any other thoughts just on anything that's really been asked in this question, because it's kind of been a long one, a big topic? Okay, we can move on, I guess. Or did you have something, David? Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that.
Okay.
I think it's good.
I guess kind of asking. Now we've already kind of addressed this because we've opened up into it, but I'll ask the flip side of it. List some on the flip side of what we just kind of talked about, but obviously, like I was saying, we were already talking about this a little bit. List some examples of modern visual novels or games you've played within the last year or two. Comparing these to those classics, like we were talking about, do you enjoy the way companies are making them? Like, this also relates to the first question too, so it might just be a lot of repeating. But I mean, do you? I guess like. Are these new ideas a good thing for visual novels? Like, do you like it when companies take risks, or are you the kind of? We'll ask this question: do you like it when companies take new risks, or do you like it when like you feel safe and secure? Take for example Apple. They always try to come up with something new, but they know that the iPhone is always going to be a success. People will always buy an iPhone, even with all the bending problems. It doesn't matter. But I mean, people will always buy an iPhone, and it's a fail-safe. Just like we were saying, Mario's a fail-safe. Mario games will always be good unless they like try some. But like, do you like it when they, go away from that platforming and they go like, hey, we're going to try something new? Like, to you as a gamer or just a visual novel person, are those games flops for you, or do you feel like, they're like a good success? Like, you're like, wow, this is really unique and different. I don't open that up to anyone.
I know I personally actually really enjoy it when companies try to take risks. Two of my favorite game series, Ace Attorney and Zero Escape. Ace Attorney, their games kind of at first start out a bit the same, but then they try to branch a little bit differently, including the newer game that came out, Dual Destinies, was a little bit different from their older games in that they were trying to do 3D sprites instead of the normal 2D sprites, and even just how they tried to branch with the story and the animated cutscenes. And I really enjoyed them trying that. I think there's something to be said about whether it worked or not. But I think it's really cool when companies try to do something different with their products. I know I'm a little not the majority opinion, but I think it's interesting when they try that. Or with Zero Escape, the first game 999 plays quite differently from the second game, Virtue's Last Reward, and I could tell that with the second game. When I first started playing it, I was a little afraid. I knew that some of the older fans may not like it so much because the gameplay is not as. I'm trying to think of how to explain it. It's a little bit easier, I think, for non-visual novel people to get into the second game because they tried to kind of streamline some things, and I thought that was interesting decision to do. And I, of course, I didn't really mind that as much, but I know some people were quite upset with that change. And so, personally, I think it's a good thing when companies try to do something different. I think the only time I don't like it is if it's a mechanic that has been tried and true that they did in the first game, and there was really no real reason to try to change it in the second game, except for maybe just some. I'm trying to think of an example. I guess any kind of trying to make things more simple. The only games I can think of where they may have tried that are actually more of console games, like a Mass Effect or something.
Yeah, I was about to say, didn't Mass Effect have like terrible gameplay in the first game, and then like completely like nobody likes Mass Effect the first game in terms of the game. But okay,
yeah,
no, good point.
Yeah. So, but just in general, like when in such like that. So I personally like it when they try to branch out, when they try to refine and try to find things that work and experiment. I support when games do that. But this is what I think.
Gentlemen, what are your thoughts?
For me, I really do like it when they take risks, and it makes the product unique, something you don't see every single day. And you could see examples of this almost everywhere. Call of Duty games, Mario, Sonic, all of them, they've been reproduced the same way, but sometimes little tweaks in the game, but it's basically the same thing. And for me, it's kind of dull, but at the same time, I do enjoy them. But I just love it more when it's unique.
Because I mean, I guess you probably would you say that you enjoy them just because they're always going to know, like, hey, we know what our fans like, so we're going to give you what you like, but we're going to try adding a little something new to it. But it essentially is the same exact thing. There's not really anything different. Or do you, yeah, so you kind of like, are you like a total, for you, David, are you like a total, like, you like completely different things, like, wow, this is completely new and original? Or are you more, I'm kind of, maybe little changes, little at a time. Don't take away my precious child. Like, I love my Zeldas. Don't change it. Skyward Sword. But, no, I mean, yeah.
I guess there's a certain point where it gets, like overboard. But I guess any kind of change for me, it'd be good. I mean, see, like, I don't know that many VNs that do that. I haven't read that many, but I know the Call of Duty series, and I remember them talking about making a change from Call of Duty Black Ops to the new one, and like more advanced. It implements some stuff that wasn't in the last one, and it'll be uh, really original and new that nobody's ever seen before. And when I tried it, it kind of was the same. I mean, there wasn't much of a difference, and I still was bored with it.
Company hype. They always
Yes.
want their stuff, but Watch Dogs, Ubisoft, talk about the incidents in E3 with them.
Oh gosh, let's not go into Watch Dogs.
But okay, so that's an interesting point. I guess I had something I wanted to ask, but I completely forgot. I will come back to you. Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, Dan, what are your thoughts on it? More modern. What do you think about it?
Okay, I need to try to focus. I'm really tired. I think innovation is always good in any kind of video game, genre, be it visual novels or just general video games. It may work, it may not work, but even if it doesn't work, some other company will look at the game and say, "Hey, this was an interesting idea. Maybe we can try it in another way. Maybe we can make it work." And then it may become a staple for a genre.
Okay. David, I remember my question. I'm kind of going to open up to everyone, but I'll start with David here. David, you made me think of a good point. Now let's go back to, because we were kind of talking about games. Let's talk more about the visual novel aspect. Like, people, what do you think of sequels? I want to ask about sequels because when it comes to games, and like more modern games are usually releasing trilogies, or they're usually releasing a sequel, and sometimes it's just called, Super Mario 2, Super Mario 3, like it's just a number. But in visual novels, most of the times, at least in my opinion, feel free to disagree with me, people want sequels in visual novels because they leave stories on cliffhangers, and you want more of the story. Most of the times, even when I'm playing video games, I want a sequel of a game because, at least for more modern games, because the story was good, and then they try to expand more on the story. But like with visual novels, this really is, people probably want sequels of games because they want to know, well, what the heck happened with the route I was going to, what the heck happened? I want more common route. Why didn't they put enough common route out? And so I'm curious as to, David, I'll start with you. Like, your thoughts on, what do you think of sequels? Do you like when a game makes a sequel and a fan disc in this case? Or do you think that fan discs are literally, again, the company is trying to just say, well, here's a bunch of free H scenes, and, obviously there's some game and fan discs that are, like, legitimate sequels and are actually very good. I know, for example, Sharon no Kuni has their fan disc, and their main route in there is actually a really good expansion on the game, but all the, additional after stories are pretty much just not really that dramatic, and there's just a bunch of H scenes. So, I mean, like, do you think they're doing that because they just want more people to enjoy what are your thoughts, I guess, on fan discs and sequels?
I think most people really, it really depends on the story, because if the story, it does, sometimes this depends on the story. If it doesn't work in a sequel, they don't really need to make a sequel in order to, appease to the fans. I mean, they probably for profit they might, but it doesn't help the story at all. Making part 1, part 2, part 3, it doesn't. They're just doing the same thing over again.
Like, you take the example of the Rance series. That has like a bajillion games for it, but some people, they're like, well, Rance 6 is bad, or whatever. I don't know the numbers. I've never played the Rance series, but, and it's like, how can you remember, for me, I'm like, how can you remember all those games and every single one? Like, you can, I guess, but it's like, they just have released so many games, but they're all pretty successful, at least from what I know. in terms of Alisoft's company, and that's their like main staple game that everyone knows from them when you think of that company. So I mean, do you like having like a million games, like in visual novels, or do you think that it's like, stick to one, maybe two, but not anymore?
I guess for me, it probably like 3 is probably the highest I could go. After that, it's kind of ridiculous.
Oh, you're a trilogy guy. Okay. Anyone else have
Yeah.
any thoughts on their sequels or just like fan discs?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record, and I apologize. But I know for me, it really does depend on the story. So, for example, when 999 first came out, I was, I enjoyed it as I played it, and then when the sequel was announced, I was actually very unsure about it. I thought, how on earth could they make this, into another game? What on earth are they gonna do? And I didn't even think it was gonna be a direct sequel. I really didn't know. I didn't really look much into it until when I bought it. And I was very pleasantly surprised because even the writer himself, when he first wrote 999, admitted that it was a standalone story. There was not really going to be much more to it. But then he managed, and it's hopefully going to be a trilogy. The other thing is on hiatus. But so such like that. But even with Phoenix Wright, originally it was going to just be one standalone game, but they managed to find a way to expand it. So for me, if the storyline makes sense that they could make multiple games, so the Ace Attorney series, you could see that making multiple games. I mean, they're all mini mystery games. With 999, I think it was a risk to make a sequel for that because it at first doesn't seem to even lend itself to any kind of sequel. So for me, if it lends itself to a sequel like naturally, I enjoy that because I feel like that there's more they can expand upon and the writers can include more kind of content and such like that. But it's usually very easy to tell when you get a sequel whether it was just to make more money or if the writers really cared about what they were writing.
Very good point. Dan, do you have any thoughts on terms of sequels and fan discs?
Yeah, if the story is good, I think. Give me a second.
Take your time. I guess more like is there any let's try this then. Is there any fan disc that you really enjoyed from a visual novel you played, or even a sequel from a game? It doesn't need to again be a visual novel.
Well, yeah, the same thing as Celestia was saying. I really
Clestae.
enjoyed the I really enjoyed the Zero Escape series. Really like 999 and like Virtue's Last Reward even more. Yeah, it depends. If the story is good, I will play the sequel. I don't really care if it's a sequel or not. And there's like the example of some visual novels that are not exactly sequels, but are in the same world, so they kind of connect to each other in some sense. Yeah, those are. Yeah, it depends on the story basically. If the story is good, I will play the visual novel or the video game, whatever.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. Anyone else have anything to add that they just in this topic itself that we might have missed that they want to feel free to throw on, or something that they thought of? Okay.
I'm good.
All right. I guess that leads us to our last question, which is probably the biggest question that I saved for last because this is probably the one I really want to talk about. And, is give some examples of changes you yourself have noticed in modern visual novels, and we'll try to stick this just to visual novels. And I do have some examples I can bring you if you need them. But I'll open it up to you guys first. What do you like about these changes? What do you dislike? And feel free, again, to use examples from specific VNs to support your opinion. So, hey, I really liked how this game did this, and I wish in other VNs they did this too, but they always don't, or it's really crappily made. Like, you can name companies, you can name games, I don't really care what you do. So I guess we'll start this up. Dan, let's start with you, because you haven't really talked first ever, so go ahead. Just what do you like and what, is some examples of like modern changes that you enjoy or visual novels that you like about the interface.
I like when they try to add some bit of gameplay to it, not exclusively just gameplay to the visual novel, just like tiny bits, like maybe Steins Gate or something that makes it seem a bit more interactive, but it doesn't really take away from the fact that it's a visual novel or ruin the experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a specific like gameplay element you enjoy? Do you like building stats? Do you like just like Little Buster said their battle system or the baseball mini game? Do you like tiny little mini games, or are you more like, man, I like the RPG element? Or do you want like actual like, hey, you're on screen and you're fighting, it's a hack and slash, and then you go back to the story? Like, what's probably your favorite gameplay element you could say?
Actually, didn't play much visual novels with gameplay except the Zero Escape series, and in that case, I think it was very interesting because you had these puzzles that served as like a nice change of pace. You had these ADV scenes, normal visual novel scenes, with a really interesting story that you get and stuff. And then you had like the puzzle scenes that kind of serve as a breather of sorts, and yeah, it's really interesting as a change of pace.
Okay, David, do you have any thoughts on, or just what do you think?
I guess there's a certain extent when you want to have, mini games, because for me, I don't really like playing that many mini games if there's no point to it. If it adds to the story, probably I will, but I don't know. I just don't really like it.
Okay, but not just gameplay elements itself. Like, what are some modern changes you like? What are some interface via, or what is a VN you could say, man, I really like the way they did this? And it does. You can even use examples of like, I really like the aesthetic pleasingness of this, VN. It was really easy to read the text. It was well formatted. The save buttons were in the right spot. They weren't like down in the bottom right as a tiny little thing that pops up, and you're like, and then it just keeps disappearing. Like, is there anything specifically that you like a visual novel interface you like, or something in a more modern VN, or even a past VN that you just wish more games would do?
Oh, there's actually one thing that I'm not exactly sure of how recent it is. Do you know that, like in Steins Gate, there's this thing called the tips system?
I have not really played. Well, I just kind of played Steins Gate, but continue, yeah.
Basically, you learn a few keywords during the story, and when you go to the tips menu, it will elaborate a lot more on what a concept is or what this thing in the game world is. It will add much more lore, and in Steins Gate's case, it actually explained a lot of interesting stuff in concerning some scientific concepts that are actually real, and in some other VNs they explain some mythological stuff and some psychological stuff as well. I mean, you kind of learn a lot with some visual novels just using this system and just having the characters explain them.
Kokoro Function did that too. They have the tip system. But anyways, David, you were saying something. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I guess for the visual novels, I guess I really enjoy it when they make it really easy for you to read. All the settings, the button placement, how it looks, it really does make it more enjoyable rather than something where like I can go back and read this text that I missed, and there's no the save is really limited, and I really want to save more than I want. So I guess trying to find a correct word for this, but more
text in the text box, or
no, like more manageable to read fluidly throughout, I guess.
Okay, I'm still kind of confused about that point.
Just like easier to read in general, like it's not necessarily like a stark, weird colors for the color scheme for like the text and text box. Is that what you mean?
It's that, and it's the save too. I think I lost track here.
More user friendly, perhaps.
Yeah, that's what the word I was looking for.
Can you name a VN specifically that you like can give a bad example of and a good example of?
A bad example? I'm not sure I could find one. I guess a good example would be Rewrite, I guess.
Okay, so you liked Rewrite style and how they did their interface.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. Does Key usually have the same interface for most of the games? I feel like they do.
I would think so.
I feel like the Rewrite one was when I was watching a stream.
Little Busters.
It was very similar to Little Busters in terms of its appearance. I know like a lot of companies have their own, obviously, engine they use, or if they do use an engine. But okay, very interesting. Clestae, what are some of your modern VNs or yeah?
Besides the two that I keep mentioning, another one I actually enjoy is Cinders by MoaCube. And Cinders is supposed to be kind of a retelling of the Cinderella story, but one thing they do there is, well, first, the art style is very different. It's not the usual anime style we're used to, but it's very beautiful. If you ever have, it's not really strictly animated per se, but they'll have the movements of the sprites. They have the mouth movements, but even the eyes move around a little bit too, which can sometimes be a little creepy, but it's just a nice little touch. And the backgrounds have little bits of it that move around, like maybe a little bit of water movement or just little parts of light. The other thing I liked about as more of a modern VN is the choice system was much more complex. Because you actually had to make decisions that kind of shaped your character and shaped Cinders actually. Choices games when there's a morality system, usually as long as you're nice to this person, you'll get the best ending. In Cinders actually, to kind of get there's no real best ending, but to get one of the better endings, you're actually supposed to be multi-purpose in what kind of things you do, whether it is, between kind of more intimidation techniques or more complacent, nice techniques, or being intelligent, and actually doing the right combination of those gets you a good ending. And psychology, I find that kind of a cool concept to try to implement. It's with visual novels, it's very hard to kind of implement a very good system of talking and interacting with other characters. But the fact
kind of cutting out a little there. But no, I kind of got your point there. So I guess
what was the last thing?
I think I got most of everything you said. But what I was actually going to expand on that was you had mentioned that you talk about the visual novels, but then that also goes into the fact of like dating sims are obviously different. You build your stats and then you go on dates, and then which is still considered technically a visual novel, but it's its own style, I guess, of visual novel, and what we're used to, at least from our community. Because I don't see a lot of many dating games in terms of like being represented on Fuwa. Maybe I just don't know where the forums are, but
it's kind of more like a sim.
Yeah, so something like that. But one of the changes I've known, and I'm kind of curious on your guys' opinion about this, is I really enjoy more recent games. One of the modern things I like is the back sprites. Now, a lot of old games usually have characters that are interacting with each other on screen. If they're not your main character, you see from the eyes of the character, or you're supposed to see the eyes of the protagonist. And then you have characters side by side if they're having conversation. And one thing I've really started enjoying is that 3D depth. Now, it still is two-dimensional, but a lot of times they will make back sprites where they'll make the character larger, but they'll draw their backside, and then they'll draw the character on the right side of the screen, which is a little bit smaller, but not by much, as if they're kind of talking one-on-one with the person who's there. And it makes you look like you're standing behind the person, and they add that depth to it. And that didn't used to do that in old VNs, I've noticed, and I really have been liking that in like Koigasaka, for example. I know Nobleworks started doing it, which is from 2010, so that's still a little bit back, but it's still pretty recent enough. And I really like that they took the time to draw the characters' backsides, because they're just sprites. You don't see their face. It's just the backside of the sprite, but it adds character depth to it. I don't know if you guys have experienced that in any of your VNs. Have you? No? Yes?
No, actually, it's the first time I'm hearing about it.
Yeah, me too.
Unfortunately,
David, we must
it's new to
steal
me,
it.
but
We must steal this idea.
I must. Yes.
oh dear.
But yeah, I really like it. And no, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, nothing. I agree. I think that is a kind of an interesting. I just like it when they try to do just implement new ideas with their art. I mean, there's so much that you can do with art on text. There's so much you can do with that, and people think that there's only one formula for it. But
well, yeah, and you
think
of a sprite, and you think of maybe like 15, 20 poses for that sprite, not CG. And then you look at this, they're saying, hey, now we draw backsides of the sprite. and they still do things instead of just standing there. So you're like, oh, it looks like I'm standing behind the character, and they're actually talking to somebody. And they're not facing me, and we're not all standing in an awkward circle. Because if you think about how everyone's standing, you'd be standing in a circle. But another also thing I noticed in VN adaptations, and I'll get your last opinion on this because we got about 5 minutes left of the podcast here. Last thing I'll kind of point out is English modernization in these VNs. And I've noticed that when I used to play like Nursery Rhyme, for example, which is a lump of sugar game, there was no English in any of the opening. Like, what I mean by English is like, you don't know what the options are. Do you know the save button's written in Japanese? The load button's written in Japanese. And I've noticed a lot of recent visual novels untranslated, and it's have put so much English in their menus and stuff. So they'll still have the Japanese, but it'll be like load game or save game, and you'll know how to read it. You won't need, it'll be like text speed, or like in Kogoro Function, everything has an English thing underneath it, and that's obviously recent Pull Tab 1, which is in 2013. So it's just, we think about this and how VN companies are trying to appeal like to the Japanese audience, but yet they're putting all this English stuff in there, and then it strikes me as odd almost sometimes, and I like it as a person who plays VNs. But I mean, I guess what is your guys' opinion about that in terms of just like if you've noticed in VNs, like, wow, there's a lot more English in these menus than there were in older games?
I think it makes things easier. I mean, I don't know Japanese, and so for me that's a nice thing that's easier for me. So I unfortunately can't speak of someone from Japan what they might think, but as someone who speaks English, it's a nice thing to have.
I mean, they love English in Japan. They really do. They love just English plastered everywhere. It's just, trust me, as a teacher who teaches Japanese students, like, it's plastered everywhere. But Dan or David, do you have any thoughts on that? Just like, do you like obviously you probably say yes, I like it because I can read it, but I mean more on a personal, like just another type of level. Like, do you think this is a nice thing they're doing for not even just English speakers?
I guess I definitely like it. Yeah, of course. Especially, hopefully they will at VNs professionally, and yeah, I would love that.
Dan, your thought?
I actually didn't hear all of your question. Did you say that they are using more English in the menus and such?
Yes, menus and such. So if you play an older game, they might just all be written in Japanese, and you just kind of have to guess and check. Like Hoshizora's menu, people had to post an English thing on it because I looked at the options and it was like, I don't know what the heck is what. And I was like clicking buttons, and then I go to full screen and be like, oh, okay, this is, I need to get it all messed up. But like, you play a game like Kokoro Function, for example, and it's obviously not translated, and it's just like, oh, look, I know what to click. Oh, text speed, okay. Oh, let's see, auto speed. Let's see, full screen, window, and you know exactly what you're doing, and you don't even need to read the Japanese.
I actually remember there's this game made by Hideo Kojima called Police Notes. It was fan translated, and I read some of the notes of the translator, and I remember him saying that although all the menu text was all in Japanese, if you are able to read Japanese, it said stuff like load to, start to. It was basically still in English, but written in Japanese.
Written incorrectly in Japanese. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before. And again, they like putting a lot of English words into their language itself.
Yeah, they really like it.
But, okay. Well, I guess, is there anything else that you guys, because we're kind of wrapping up here, we got about, couple minutes left. Is there anything you wanted to add, a question you felt like adding? Because we still have a little bit of time. We can obviously go over the hour for a little bit. But is there anything you guys feel like you want to add or have anything else to say that we've forgotten?
Trying to think of a good one.
All right. I mean, if you don't got, you don't got anything, you don't got anything. No, it's absolutely fine. Well, guys, I would like to thank you then for coming. We got about an hour in here, so I mean, I will upload this podcast. For those of you who are watching, this will be the 11th podcast episode, and I will be working on the 3 groups. I've been getting emails back from them. Some of them might just be with the project lead or someone from the project. They might be interviewing them. Some of them might be a little more larger groups. Where I'll be asking them questions and interviewing them, and they will be answering them. I know one of them has the artist, the composer, and the leader all on board, which will be interesting. But, obviously with that many people and trying to get their schedules and what they're doing, and they realize it's a little more of a hassle, so it might be a little bit. So we'll hopefully get those when I'm leaving for Japan or before Japan. We'll see, though. We'll see what happens with that. I will continue the Community Spotlight video series. I have some ideas of what I want to spotlight here recently, and then the Get to Know Your Community. I'll probably grab some more people, and I promise I'll do Invert Mouse's interview. I apologize for those of you who are waiting patiently for that. It's just I have not had the time to get that available. But anyways, you guys, thank you for coming. I appreciate it, and I hope you had a good time. Feel free to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, guys.